Good afternoon. Welcome to another Friday program of the City Club of Portland. I'm Doug Marker, City Club President. Our program today is The Cost of Congestion, How Traffic Jams Waste More Than Just Your Time. And our panelists are Jay Waldron, Ann Gardner, and Michael Powell. Just a reminder to please remember to turn off your cell phones and other paging devices for our program. I have a few announcements to make about upcoming programs. Our next Friday forum, April 7th, is another debate, the Multnomah County Chair election debate, Diane Lynn and Ted Wheeler, and that will be moderated by Tanya Parker. This afternoon, from 4:30 to 6 p.m., we want to welcome you to another Final Friday, our open house held on the last Friday of each month, where you can socialize with other members. It's a free and fun way to learn more about how to get involved with your club. Next week, our Growth Management and Environment Issue Committee will meet from 12 to 1:30 p.m. on Thursday at City Club Commons for a conversation about how the City of Portland will implement Measure 37. The committee's guest speaker will be Chris Dirth of the City of Portland's Planning Bureau. The meeting is free and open to the public. We have several new members joining us today, and I'd like to ask them to stand and be recognized as I read their names. Corky Collier, Shelley Lyon, Sarah McMahon, and Lynn Lundquist. Welcome to City Club. And speaking of membership, we're in the midst of our spring membership drive, and we have a special offer for both current and prospective members. First, all new members who join during our spring membership drive will receive a free voucher to join us for another Friday Forum lunch. And as an incentive for current members, thanks to a special gift from Ned Hayes, you can receive a free voucher for a Friday Forum lunch when you recruit a new member and they list you as a referral on the membership form. There are membership brochures on each table, and Margaret Eichmann, our Membership and Development Director. Margaret, where are you? You just wave. Hi. We'll be happy to help you on your way out. Our sponsors this quarter who make the broadcast of City Club possible are CH2M Hill, Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt, and West Coast Bank. Will you join me in thanking our sponsors? To our program. Our city is named Portland by the flip of a coin in 1845. It was Francis Pettigrove's choice of honoring Portland, Maine, over Asa Lovejoy's hope to call us Boston. The name turned out to be a good fit for a city based on ocean and river trade. Our city's fortunes have been tied to our location on the confluence of the Willamette and Columbia Rivers since those times. Today, our transportation advantage comes also from being at the junction of Interstates 5 and 84, and from being the home of the Portland International Airport. We're also the city of light rail, the urban streetcar, TriMet, cars, bicycles, and even skateboards. And we're at the point now where how we get around and how the world moves through us is a serious concern. A recent study documented impacts to Portland commerce from increased congestion. Intel now has to move shipment departure times up to 2 hours earlier just to get to the Portland airport through afternoon traffic. And if they miss a flight, it affects their production across the globe. Cisco Foods opened a new regional distribution center in Spokane to better serve their market area because it's taking too long to serve its market from their Portland center. And Providence Health Systems is reporting that medical deliveries, which have to be rapid and frequent, are getting very difficult on the west side, causing them to need to relocate their warehousing facilities. Our panel today will address transportation in the modern Portland and the issues our cities and region must face. Our first panelist is Jay Waldron. Jay is an attorney with the firm of Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt and is president of the Port of Portland Commission. He is co-chair of the Metro Transportation Investment Task Force, and he serves on a number of other community boards. Jay is also a trustee of the U.S. Rugby Foundation. He's played, coached, and broadcast rugby on a regional, national, and international level. And Gardner joined Schnitzer Steel Industries Incorporated in December 2005 as the government relations manager for their western region. In that capacity, she is responsible for representing the firm on local, regional, and state regulatory matters, and her area of expertise is land use and transportation policy. And Michael Powell owns a rather large bookstall on the corner of Burnside and 10th. Michael moved to Portland in 1979 to join his father at the rapidly expanding used bookstore called Powell's Books, and he spent the following 20 years growing the bookstore. Michael serves on the Port of Portland board, was active in the Portland streetcar, and serves on the transportation committees of both the Oregon Business Alliance and the Portland Business Alliance. And with those introductions, we'll begin with Jay Waldron. Jay?
Good afternoon. Playing rugby is probably my prime qualification to talk about congestion. I want to thank you for having us today, and I want to thank Ann and Michael for agreeing to share the podium with me. Now, you probably spent your morning fighting traffic. You're going to spend your afternoon fighting traffic, and now I'm going to have you spend your lunch listening to us talk about traffic. The least I can do is begin with a joke about traffic engineers, which is not an easy task. So this traffic engineer is walking down the street, and he's carrying this huge chunk of asphalt. He walks into a bar, he looks at the bartender, and he says, "Bartender, I want 2 beers, one for me and one for the road." All right, I'm going to begin with a brief detour on my way to my topic of traffic congestion and its cost to our regional economy. And the brief detour is this. Before we talk about the growing needs of our increasingly congested road system and its ability to move freight, I want to acknowledge the many successes that we have had as a region and as a state with our existing transportation policy. To live in Portland is to know that we have one of the best transit systems in the country, a fact that we should be incredibly proud of. The presentations today are certainly not about suggesting that it is time to change that commitment. We have also tried harder than almost any metropolitan region in this country to manage growth so that housing and employment are located near each other, which cuts down on our commutes, improves the quality of our lives, and the quality of our environment. As a state, we have recently taken some big steps to improve our basic transportation system. 2 rounds of the Oregon Transportation Investment Act, passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, and the recent passage of the Connect Oregon program will make a noticeable improvement on our transportation system. And both of these programs prove to the public, whose dollars, after all, we are charged with spending wisely, that the state and the region are wise stewards of their dollars, of our dollars. But the bottom line is, we need to do more to solve traffic congestion in our region, a lot more. The results of our cost of congestion study show that it's just not a matter of convenience, of a few minutes of commute time that we need to solve. It's a matter of our economic future. Most of us agree that congestion is a big problem. In a recent Metro survey by the Davis-Hibbets firm, congestion finished second to education among the key issues we feel are facing our region. Congestion is seen as the #1 issue affecting the quality of our lives. A majority of those polled believe that congestion is already costing this region jobs, and most of us understand that transportation projects produce jobs far beyond the construction jobs that come with the projects. Let me take a second detour. Does anyone in here remember the paperless office? Not long ago, it seemed that the flood of desktop computers, emails, the web, meant that we would have an office environment without paper. Obviously, the opposite has come to pass. Access to computers and laser printers just meant that we had more things we wanted to print and better, faster ways to print more. I bring this up because I think there is another technological myth that we flirt with. It's one often used to argue against investing in transportation, and it's the so-called freightless economy. This idea is expressed in two ways. First, people think the true value created in our economy is intellectual in nature, and therefore it's not dependent on the movement of freight. And second, because we are now all shopping online, somehow we think this creates less demand on the traffic system and on the movement of freight. I would argue that the first is wrong and the second is dead wrong. Online shopping has had the same effect as the paperless office. It's created far more demands on our road system. You may be buying from home, but what you are buying gets on a truck, then it gets on a little plane, then it gets on a big plane, then it gets on a big truck, then it gets on a little truck. You may have gotten it from eBay or Powell's.com, but by the time it gets to your home on Walker Road or on Burnside, it's gone through a lot of different facets of our transportation system. The UPS man doesn't travel very well on TriMet. Electronic commerce is creating dramatic increases in the movement of freight that now needs to move further and faster than it ever has. And even if we are creating more wealth here, among intellectual things like design or software or advertising, we all of us, turn that wealth into stuff. We all have more houses, more cars, more clothes, more cell phones, and all those things make their way around the world, around this country, around the region, and to your doorstep. This region is also a strong part of the so-called old economy. Manufacturing is very strong in our region, especially in metals. Agriculture is central to this state's economy, and along with forestry, agriculture, metals, all put tremendous pressure on our road system and our rail system. More importantly, logistics and distribution are an historic and growing part of our economy. Portland, to probably even my surprise, has the third largest transportation-related jobs percentage in the United States. It's third behind New York and Miami. Our GNP, our local GNP from transportation, is double other comparable cities. But you already know that because that's why we're called Portland. We're here because, as was noted, we're at the confluence of two great rivers, two first-class railroads, two interstate freeways. We prosper and do well in this region because of trade. And I present this preamble so that you have a context for the cost of congestion study. And there are two basic points. First, moving freight is critical to our economy. And second, it is especially important to this region's economy. Of all the places in the United States, this is one of the places that congestion will matter the most. So what is the cost of congestion study, and what does it say about our region and our region's investment in transportation? Well, back in 2002, Metro convened a task force to take a look at our transportation needs and possible solutions. The task force quickly realized when we started talking to the business community that they wanted to understand how congestion affected the economy and their businesses. not just how it added a few minutes to commuting or the harm it did to our air quality. Well, we commissioned this study, and what did we learn? We learned that the cost of congestion is a matter of nearly $1 billion, that's a B, and 10,000 jobs. Let me be specific about that. We asked 3 questions in the cost of congestion study. First, why is transportation important to our economy? Second, what is the impact of congestion on the region's economy? And third, what is the cost? The answer to the first about importance is obviously that we're a trading center. The answer to the impact is that business becomes a prisoner of congestion. And the answer to the cost is potentially $1 billion by the year 2025. Well, let's take a look at why transportation is important to our economy. You're probably thinking, well, congestion exists in all areas around the country. So what's so special about Portland? Well, I go back to the beginning of this talk. Portland is a gateway city. Our location and our ability to move goods have been major factors in attracting industry that depends on market access. The economy in this region has grown up around our trading industries. Industries like Intel, Nike, or Schnitzer. Many of you probably don't think of Nike or Intel as traded industries. Intel may be a large repository of intellectual capital, and Nike may be our largest homegrown business. But think about what they do. They trade goods with the rest of the world. That's what their business is. They're the type of business that are what we call discretionary. They could locate any place. There's reasons that they've chosen Portland, and one is our transportation system. Every year, $5 billion of freight move through our airport, and $11 billion of freight move through our seaport. And another thing that people don't understand, I think that's unique about Portland, is that we don't have the economic base or the population base to support a large internal economy, like the Bay Area does, or LA does, or even Seattle. Congestion isn't as important to them. They have internal healthcare industries, or education industries, or other industries. Our internal industry is external. It's our ability to move goods in the face of congestion. We all prosper here from trade. And how big an issue is congestion becoming? Well, as we all know, it took about 110 years to get 1 million people here. In the next 20 years, we're going to add another 1 million people to this area. There's going to be rapid vehicle growth from 4 reasons: population, the global economy, which is increasing trade, the expanded markets that our own businesses are developing, and from internet sales. And the increase in traffic over the next 20 years is going to be significant. Cars are going to increase by 45%, but trucks are going to increase by 120%, and a big driver of that is you and the internet economy. What is the impact of congestion on the region's businesses? Well, let's look at ourselves, which is where we usually start. We all have options. Through good land use planning, sometimes we can live close to our job. We have a great transit system. Some of us have a choice of walking. Some of us have a choice of bicycle. Some of us can skip rush hour. Some of us can work at home. None of those options are available to freight. Business, in a sense, becomes a prisoner of congestion. The miles of freeway congestion projected to increase over the next 20 years is 250%. Worse, the miles of arterial congestion that are expected to increase over the next 20 years are 300%. As Mike Tyson would say, there's going to be no place to hide, no place to run. We are going to be facing gridlock. There aren't going to be that back road situation. And just picture in your own mind the I-5 bridge. Every week, nearly 2 billion, that's another B, billion pounds of freight moves down the I-5 corridor across that bridge. Think of the effect those bottlenecks are going to have on our future economy and on the so-called era of just-in-time delivery. The study, as was mentioned, addresses specific impacts on business in this area. It addresses the cost of overtime. It addresses, for example, the need to have additional drivers to cover the same territory. PGE or PP&L have the same maintenance territory they had 20 years ago, but they need more people to cover it because of congestion. That's a greater cost on your electricity bill. Inventories need to be larger. In this era of just-in-time, congestion means a larger inventory. Congestion means for one of our hospitals, as was discussed, they now have to build a west side warehouse for their inventory because they can't get the hospital supplies just in time from the east side any longer. That adds to your hospital bill. Intel has changed its production schedule 4 times in the last 8 years so that it can be sure it gets its chips to the airport in time. And a missed flight, it's a pretty tough thing for any of us, but a missed flight for Intel means that a plant in Asia shuts down the next day because it doesn't have the goods to process. We've heard about distribution centers now choosing Spokane over here because of the beginnings of our congestion. We've heard about businesses having to change their shifts because workers aren't able to get there in time. And of course, my favorite example, cold pizza. Think about that. It's an analogy for all business. Every pizza company exists and has a market exactly as far as it can deliver hot pizza. Congestion shrinks that market. And the more that market shrinks, the more that ability to serve people and to make a profit and the cost to that business increases. Cold pizza is a perfect analogy for what congestion is doing to business in the Portland area. And that example leads to an effect on competitiveness. There are so many businesses that are here because of the ability to move goods. And once you affect the competitiveness here, you affect their choice of do they want to be in Portland or Spokane? Do they want to be in Portland or more hopefully Bend? Do they want to be in Portland or do they want to be in Omaha? Now, the study looked at 2 levels of investment to test the return on investment to the economy and learned several things. First, our basic plans now are to invest $4 billion over the next 20 years. What'll that do? That'll mean that everyone in this room in 20 years from now is going to spend the equivalent of a week's vacation more time in traffic. When you think about the cost of transportation, how much would you pay for a week's vacation? Because you're going to lose it in 20 years. The study then looked at what if we invested an additional $6 billion over the next 20 years? They didn't optimize that investment. They didn't choose whether it should be smart devices, whether it should be more transit to free up certain roads. But even doing it just off the shelf, it showed that a benefit to the economy of transportation investment is $844 million annually, 6,500 permanent jobs, and 3,000 construction jobs annually. Investment in transportation helps productivity, which means economic growth and tax revenues for other needs. In our income tax-driven state, investment in transportation means more money for education. The value is 2 to 1, even without it optimized. Every time you invest $1 in transportation, this region gets $2 back. So in conclusion, my message is threefold. We get $2 in economic benefits for each dollar we invest in transportation. To me, a transportation project is not a spending project. It's an investment project. Secondly, I think from now on we should look at all transportation projects through the investment lens. What is their value to our region? And third, and most importantly, as I've tried to explain, transportation is not just a quality of life issue. It's a key to our future prosperity. I want to refer back to what I said in the introduction. 50 years ago, we knew the importance of investing in transportation. You just have to look out can't look out these windows, but you'll see the investments we made in rail, in highway, in the seaport, in the airport. That's why we're Portland and not Des Moines. It's because we invested in our transportation future. And I would argue that we're at a similar point today, and it demands the same kind of vision that we invest in our transportation system, because to me, along with investment in education, investment in transportation are the two keys to our economic future. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to be included in this discussion today. Thank you very much. Schnitzer Steel participated in this study, and we're really very pleased with the results because we think the conclusion and the information that Jay has talked about and that you'll read about in the study is really going to be very helpful to this community as it makes transportation decisions moving forward. The purpose of my remarks is to provide basically a case study of how congestion affects Schnitzer Steel, because we think that the effects on our manufacturing company exemplify the experiences that literally hundreds of other manufacturing companies are having in this region. As background, Schnitzer Steel represents the classic American success story. Sam Schnitzer came to this country at the turn of the last century, and he began a one-man business of collecting and reselling scrap metal. At first, he carried the scrap on his back, and later he purchased a cart to lighten the load, but it was only later still that he bought a horse to pull the cart. This year, our company is celebrating its 100th anniversary. Today, we operate coast to coast with 6 deep draft ports, 30 metals recycling facilities, more than 50 auto parts stores, a steel mill, and 2 steel inventory depots. These operations are all involved in the collection of end-of-life steel products. That's automobiles, appliances, construction remainders, even old school buses. And then we resell the recovered metal to steel mills where it is made into new steel products. Today, Schnitzer Steel Industries is a publicly traded company. We employ over 3,000 people, and our headquarters is here in Portland. I'd like to start with one significant example of how congestion affects our business. Our steel mill is located in McMinnville, and it's part of this region's very successful metals industry cluster. Over the last 20 years, Schnitzer has invested more than $125 million to essentially completely rebuild this facility. We rebuilt one rolling mill, we added a second, we put in a new melt shop, we added capacity to make coiled rebar and wire rod products so as to eliminate waste, and we invested in a number of energy conservation measures. All of this was so that the mill could stay competitive and operate in a very competitive global marketplace. The melting furnace, which we replaced in December of 2004, is really the guts of the operation. It melts scrap steel at 3,000 degrees and is continuously casting molten steel, making a variety of products. And those products depend on the needs of our customers. For its feedstock, the mill is entirely dependent on scrap collected at our West Coast facilities located in Sacramento, Fresno, Tacoma, Eugene, and most particularly our facility in North Portland. The mix of scrap, the formula, depends on the product specification, and those may change from day to day. That means we really need to be nimble in getting the right mix of scrap to McMinnville. If we overstock in one type of metal, we take up valuable storage space, but under no circumstances can we be understocked. There must be a continuous feed because if production stops and the overhead costs continue, and overhead costs do continue, that's a formula for failure. Looking just at the transport from North Portland to McMinnville, both the scrapyard and our steel mill are designed to ship product by rail, but we don't use rail nearly as much as we'd like to. So on average, we run 50 trucks a day from our North Portland facility, out I-5, down 99 to McMinnville. And these trucks are each carrying between 25 and 30 tons of scrap each. We used to be able to make 3 turns a day between Portland and McMinnville. Now, while we're using freight routes, the areas from Tigard to Dundee are experiencing tremendous residential and commercial growth. Unfortunately, this growth has not been accompanied by a comparable increase in highway capacity. Where we used to make 3 turns a day, now we can only make 2. This makes us less efficient. We need more trucks and more drivers to do the same amount of work that we did 10 years ago. Now, our journey to McMinnville isn't the only way or the only increase in congestion, how it affects our costs. Our Portland operation receives scrap metal from throughout the state, from Idaho, Montana, Southwest Washington, and scrap dealers from Pasco and Pendleton, Medford, Eugene, they used to be able to predict their travel time. No more. Almost every day, we get a call from a scrap dealer who is stuck in traffic on the Terwilliger curves or where I-84 comes to a standstill where it merges with I-5. This forces us to keep workers on late, and it increases our overtime costs. So you might ask, why is the efficient movement of scrap metal important to Portlanders? Well, first, collecting scrap metal for reuse is consistent with our values as a sustainable community. Scrap metal that is recycled doesn't end up in the waste stream. It isn't left abandoned on a vacant lot, or it isn't dumped in the woods somewhere. Recycling scrap metal also saves energy. The EPA tells us that we save between about 75% of the energy costs if you use scrap metal as opposed to using iron ore. Another reason that our efficiency is important is that we employ almost 500 men and women at the steel mill alone, and these are manufacturing jobs, jobs with full benefits, the type of jobs we need to help keep this economy diversified. Like so many other Portland manufacturing companies, logistics and distribution is at the heart of our business. Here in Portland, as with many of our other facilities around the country, we use rail, truck, barge, and ocean carrier to ship product. Transportation costs are an important factor in our overall cost of doing business. So if we aren't efficient or the infrastructure doesn't work for us, that affects the bottom line. And that affects our ability to compete and to expand and to provide the kind of employment opportunities that our region needs. As I've said, we are competing in the global marketplace. The steel mill in McMinnville will stay open only as long as it can meet or beat the price of steel made in China or Korea, or for that matter, non-union domestic mills. The employees at Cascade are implementing every efficiency possible. We are very proud of them. But you can imagine if we were still trying to operate our business with a horse and a cart, as Sam Schnitzer did in the early days, of course not. We have made many changes over the years, and we continue to invest and upgrade in order to grow our business and remain competitive in the global environment in which we operate. I know that I speak for other manufacturing companies when I say the regional transportation system must also keep pace with our company's needs and the needs of the region's economy. In closing, I want to reaffirm Schnitzer's support and endorsement of the cost of congestion study. A number of businesses, including ours, participated in this study because it is our responsibility as corporate citizens to get involved in the discussion about highway congestion. It's our responsibility to realistically address what it takes to create and maintain an efficient transportation system. And we, the business community, must demand a return on the public's investment in its transportation system, just as we demand a return on our own investments. We can do that if and only if we're fully informed about the real cost of congestion.
I've had the pleasure of working with Ann on a number of transportation committees, and she's almost always that nice until the moment you forget to give due obedience to the movement of freight in this community. And then there's another side of Ann that comes out and slams you into the ground. So I want to clear up a small misstatement in my introduction. I'm not currently a member of the Port of Portland. I had that pleasure a number of years ago. When I left, I hired a new executive director, classic case of trading up. But Bill, you're doing a great job. I guess I've been asked here to put a different face on the issue of congestion, and you might find it only modestly, maybe a little surprising that a retailer or bookseller would find this issue of interest. I serve on a number of transportation committees because I think it's critical. I've come to this issue with that mindset. If the infrastructure of this community fails, its retailers, its manufacturers, its businesses, we're all in a ton of hurt. And I find my own future for my company very much integrated into this question. Jay well summarized the issues at hand, the dimensions of the problem. I just want to remind you that 95%, probably more than that, of what you consume, eat, everything that you pick up, buy, comes from outside of this community. And 95%, roughly, it's a guess, but roughly, of what we manufacture and produce in this community of traded goods leaves this community. We're a small market. We do not consume enough of what we produce to be anywhere near self-sustaining. So the obvious is, how do you get it in and how do you get it out, and how do you do that efficiently? At Powell's inbound, to give you some sense of the scale for us, every new book, almost every sideline, all of our remainders, that is the bargain books you see on tables, come from somewhere else. That comes to about 3 million books a year. In addition, about 1 million used books are sourced somewhere from outside of this community. So in total, about 4 million items have to flow into Portland. They have to flow in an expeditious way because just-in-time inventory is just as important to us as it is to Schnitzer Steel. If we don't have the book, you're disappointed as a customer, and we lose your loyalty. So it's very important that we be able to replace that sold copy with a new one and do it in a cost-effective and a timely manner. 4 million books equates to about 100 semi-trucks. Unfortunately, they don't come quite that neatly, so they show up at about 6 or 8 trucks a day, one place or another. We have 2 warehouses, one at 16th and Hoyt. That's where all the new stuff comes and is redistributed from. And then we have a warehouse at 29th and Industrial, and that's where all the used books are processed that come from outside of the community. On an outward bound basis, we're fairly involved in the internet. We have been for a long time. About a third of our business is now internet based. It's certainly one of our major growth opportunities. We've often wanted to be classified as the global neighborhood bookstore, and the internet gives us the means to do that. That means currently we're shipping about 3,000 parcels a day, UPS, Parcel Post, DHL. The tricky part of that, much like you heard from Nike, is that the delivery on that is heavily biased towards the late afternoon. Our customers don't appreciate the fact that if we say, well, I'm sorry, we're in the Pacific Northwest, it takes us an extra day to get our product to you because you're on the East Coast. They want it in a timely manner, and they don't care about our problems. So what we do is to try and team up with these shippers and get the product out as late as possible, because that means we can satisfy that day's customer to the maximum advantage. But one day loss in that is one day loss against our competition, and our competition has more centralized local distribution systems. Dad got to Portland, Oregon because he was trying to get as far away from New York as he could. He was headed for Seattle. The car broke down here, and sometimes when I'm distributing goods, I thought, Dad, why didn't the car break down in Kansas City? I mean, you know. But joking aside, A lot of people like myself who've started out perhaps in a modest way, and I'm thinking, for instance, of Hannah Anderson, developed a good regional national business distributing goods out of Portland, manufacturing, distributing out of Portland, have shifted their distribution to the Midwest because they just need that timely delivery function, and that's a loss to Portland. Exacerbate that problem by tightening up the arterial roads and the arteries of this community, and you exacerbate that problem a good deal more. Within our company, we run a small fleet of trucks, 4 or 5. Sole function is to visit each store twice a day. That's to distribute all the new product and used product I just talked about, shift product from store to store. At least 2 wholesalers we stop in town and pick up things for the internet business. As you're probably aware, we have a store in Beaverton, we have stores at the airport. Certainly it's not unimaginable that we might someday have a store in Vancouver or south. Those are all challenges to be able to get that product out and around in a timely fashion and not have those trucks sitting on the freeway somewhere. It costs about $50 an hour to keep a truck moving, staff and truck costs. And if you lose an hour a day per truck, those costs begin to add up, plus the lost opportunity costs and being able to have your inventory where you need it, when you need it. And then part you haven't heard about here, which a retailer has to think about, is the movement of customers. As you know, we run a regional attractor of a business in downtown Portland. It's critical to us that we be able to access customers from throughout the whole region. For if we only rely on the population of Portland, that's about 400,000 out of over 2 million people in this region. So if we can only access people who can get down to our store off the inner city street system, we're probably holding ourselves down to maybe no more than 300,000 potential customers out of 2 million. And while certainly we don't draw from Vancouver or elsewhere in the scale that we do from the inner city, we do draw from these regions, and quite heavily. If it's too difficult to get to downtown Portland and back out again, too difficult to get on 217 and get to my store, too difficult to get back to your home, it's a discretionary visit. You can go to the internet, you can go to a neighborhood store, you can do a lot of things. You can watch television. I mean, you can do a lot of things and not come downtown to Powell's. It's a pretty easy decision to make if it's just too difficult. And I'm afraid people are making it now, and I'm really horrified about what those decisions might look like in 2015 when we're talking about 6, 7, 8 hours of congestion on our expressway system. On a personal level, I think maybe there's another face to this as well. We all want to access the regional opportunities that living in Portland provides us. One of the reasons we live here is because we enjoy the outdoors, we enjoy the restaurants, we enjoy the shopping opportunities. Those are widely dispersed throughout the community and throughout the region. You want to go out to the wine district, you want to go to Mount Hood, down to the coast for the day. That is part of the quality of life in this community. And that is equally at risk. When it's too hard and you say it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, by the time I pack and hit the expressway, I really can't get to the beach until 8, 9 o'clock at night. I think I'll take a pass. You're surrendering yourself to a kind of closed-in lifestyle that is the antithesis of what we want, I think, in life in Portland. So it isn't just about economics, so it certainly is about economics, but it's also about the kind of quality of life that we experience here in this community. And there are forces and people in this community who would prefer that trucks and cars not have the kind of access because they believe in alternative modes of transportation or because they don't believe in the car or they have other issues. So it's not a slam dunk issue. It's an issue that has to be fought out on a daily basis, and these committees that I work with often have some pretty grueling challenges in front of them in order to explain to the politicians in this community and to the other decision makers about why this is a critical issue. I trust you understand why. I certainly do. Thanks very much.
We'll now open the program to questions from the floor. Questions are a privilege for City Club members only, and please limit your questions to 30 seconds or less. Our first question will be asked by our board host, Chris Smith. Chris is a member of our Board of Governors and is the lead internet technologist for the Xerox Office Group. He is a citizen activist focusing on civic engagement, neighborhoods, and transportation. He serves on the board of the Portland Streetcar and served for 3 years on Metro's Transportation Policy Committee. And Chris blogs about transportation policy at portlandtransport.com. I hope that's a free site.
It is. Thank you, Doug. So I'm one of those alternative transportation advocates that Michael talked about. So I come to this a little bit conflicted. My core values say that We are a healthier, more efficient, more environmentally sustainable region if we live closer to where we work, if we can walk and bicycle to the grocery store, if we minimize our automobile travel. And I think there's some good evidence to support that. There's a national study that says that where people nationally spend about 19% of their household income on transportation, here in the Portland region we spend about 15%. So there's already an economic benefit yielded from our more compact, smart growth kind of environment. But I am conflicted because I make my living in our region's high-tech industry, selling the printers that tanked the paperless office that Jay talked about. And I know that a lot of the conclusions of this report are absolutely accurate. We are driven by our traded sector economy, and it is dependent on transportation links. So I'm trying to think how to think about this report. And I believe it's very important that we have this because it's a chance for the planning community and the business community to talk about this issue. So my question is about how we invest, because I think that's what this really comes down to. What's called the preferred system in Metro's regional transportation plan that would spend that extra $6 billion would add a lot of freeway lane miles, would do a lot of other things that treat cars and trucks equally. But even with all the freight that we talked about, trucks are about 7% of the vehicle miles traveled in our region. So my question is, what can we do to selectively invest in things that help our freight system? And is part of the answer pricing? Because it seems to me it's pretty clear that Intel would be happy to pay a very high toll to get their shipment to the airport on time, whereas those of us who have some choices might make some different choices if we had to look at a toll or some other fee. So, thank you.
Am I supposed to feel that no one told me I had to answer the question?
One of you has.
I'll be happy to. Just like back in school, all of the above. The whole point of the cost of congestion study and our presentation to you is to reframe the discussion a wee bit, to have all of us start to talk about transportation in terms of freight, which it often isn't, and more importantly, to talk about transportation in terms of investment. And so when I look at transportation, and I'm not a policy wonker, I didn't take transportation in college or et cetera, I look at all of them, all the modes as sort of equal starting out, and what is the best way to invest our dollar? I mean, if putting more sidewalks in increases more people walking and there's less vehicles on the road, that helps freight. If more people bicycle to work, that helps freight. If freight is able to use some of the smart devices for lanes on highways or entering highways, or if freight gets its own highway lane on some highway, that helps freight. I just think it's, to use a cliche, it's kind of a holistic approach. What's the best way to invest our money and make sure that we ensure our future prosperity and maintain our quality of life? I know they sound like cliches, but I'm not on the transit side or the bus side or the freight side. I'm on the what's the best way to spend our money and maintain our quality of life side.
I would like to add that sometimes it's cast as an either-or proposition, and at least in some part, it's not. And that is on the funding side, at least at the federal level. You're talking about discrete pots of money, and federal money is not the same as transit money, which is not the same as streetcar money, which is not the same as port or airport money. So they're not necessarily hostile to each other. The local matches can be a source of pain, trying to sort out where you get your local matches from and how much comes in. But even there, the pots are somewhat discrete. TriMet has its source of revenues. Portland Department of Transportation has it. So clearly, it's got to be multimodal, and it's got to be from the pedestrian through the expressway. I think the problem to date has sometimes been framing it on the alternative mode to the potential, I guess I should say, ignoring of the conventional modes and the belief that conventional modes are somehow bad and that alternative modes are somehow good. Neither are inherently good or bad. They hit a function, they serve a purpose, and we have to be mindful of all of them.
The funding sources do make a difference as to what we can invest in, but as a community, we should be communicating to our legislators about our need for freight mobility, and we should be participating in the crafting of the rulemaking at the federal level to make sure that those funding programs are designed to help with freight mobility.
Thank you, panelists, for being here. My name is Tom Cox. I'm a candidate for Metro, and I'm a City Club member. Metro is the organization, of course, responsible for transportation planning, and it's been captured by religious extremists. They hate cars. They feel congestion is your punishment for being a bad person and driving your evil car. And Metro has said publicly that some forms of congestion are good and that Portland should seek to emulate Los Angeles. My question to you is this sort of a mindset compatible, do you believe, with any real solution to our congestion problems?
What part of Los Angeles? You mean like Hollywood?
They weren't specific.
Go ahead, Ann.
Well, I'm
kind of the Ed McMahon for you.
Yeah, right. I understand. I have heard some of those comments as well. But I've been working closely with folks at Metro, and I'm seeing a new understanding of the importance of freight mobility. They've hired a new freight coordinator, Dina Plattman. She's excellent. They're beginning to develop a regional freight plan. Some of us will be helping with that. I had a conversation with Andy Catugno at the Portland's Freight Committee meeting here a couple of weeks ago. And Andy said, you know, as a region, we've done a great job in planning for transit, but we just flat out haven't done as good a job on the roads as we should have. So I have heard those comments as well, but I'm quite frankly seeing a new response to this issue from Metro, and I'm really confident moving forward. But I do appreciate your question.
Good afternoon. LaVon Griffin-Valade, Multnomah County Auditor's Office, City Club member. Thank you for your very interesting and important presentation. I really appreciate it. I also appreciate the discussion of efficiency. As an auditor, that very much appeals to me. So my question for you today is, what role can local government, specifically Multnomah County, play in solving the congestion problem?
Well, Multnomah County has the responsibility for the bridges, and a number of bridges have undergone important maintenance, and more bridges will also be requiring improvements, particularly the Selwood Bridge. I think that's number one on their list. As Multnomah County goes forward with its analysis, it needs to take into consideration what has changed in this region and the role that the Selwood Bridge. There's been an expansion of the urban growth boundary out in East County. That bridge is the only crossing for 10 miles, and it serves much more than a local neighborhood. It is very important for Multnomah County as it proceeds with planning for the rebuilding of the Selwood Bridge that it really looks long-term. That will be a 100-year investment. It will take maybe $100 million. We need to absolutely make sure that we address capacity issues and begin to solve congestion with that investment.
I might add two things. One, it's always struck me as strange that a street stops at Multnomah County and then it starts in Washington County, and one side is paved and one isn't, and the same type of people and the same type of use. I really don't understand why we don't have, maybe we do, total cooperative agreements, so streets and as TriMet is and other things are seamless. But I think the second area that I think is important is we did some polling as part of the Metro Transportation Investment Task Force. And one of the things, well, the first thing we learned is that citizens in this Tri-County region support multimodal. There isn't a strong constituency as you all might think for one form of transportation or another. It's all of the above. But secondly, we found that when you poll someone in Gresham about a transportation project in Washington County, they get it. And they're supportive of it, and they understand that the whole system in this region is linked. And you don't get parochial poll results from a different version in Clackamas County or in Washington County. The vast majority of people see this as a seamless system.
Bill Savage, City Club member. Since Ray Polonian's not here, I'll ask the rail question. And you mentioned that you would like to use rail, but don't. I'd be interested to know why. And a bigger question, it seems like, well, I'm real proud as a Portlander of what we've done with light rail and streetcar. I'm wondering if we could do something similar with freight, to use rail better to move freight than we have in the past.
Thank you very much for the question, because I could have spent the entire 7 minutes talking to you just about the challenges of moving product by rail. And there's a very long answer, and I'll try to be brief. Between Portland and McMinnville, the direct line is over Rex Hill, and it has fallen into disrepair. So we are unable to take that direct route, so our steel shipments would need to go to Albany and perhaps Eugene and then turn around. That would take days and days. But the answer is really much larger than that. That with the increase in freight in truck traffic that we've primarily been talking about, there has been a comparable increase in rail. And rail, similarly, hasn't made the kind of investments to keep up with demand. So for a company like ours, over the past few years, we couldn't get the rail cars. They wouldn't necessarily come on time. And now, more recently, the rail companies have raised their rates to the extent that they can, because they need to be efficient and primarily service the hook and haul trains, the unit trains, and our requests for 20 cars, 30 cars just isn't sufficient volume. Now, it's a huge issue. It's one that this community should be having a conversation about. It needs to happen at the federal level, but it's, again, it's much more efficient for us to ship by rail by design, but it doesn't work for many, many reasons. Thank you for asking that question.
I'd like to follow up briefly on that and really address the dollars and cents issue. One of the issues around rail transportation in north-south, Washington to the California border, is that those rail lines are both congested and in severe need of repair. California and Washington are stepping up to some of the local obligation and meeting that. Oregon is not. Oregon is rapidly disinvesting in transportation. It may seem contradictory when you see light rail lines opening up or streetcar lines expanding, but Portland has something like, I think, a 100-year backlog of maintenance on its streets and falls further behind every year. It has no wiggle room to fix the streets, let alone pave the ones coming in from another community. The last bond measure that we passed in the state legislature, which was to address primarily bridge decay issues, addressed approximately 1/3 of the pending issues. We are way behind the curve on funding transportation issues simply at the maintenance level, let alone confronting increased utilization over the next 15 or 20 years. Oregon has to make a decision. Washington and California have made those decisions. We have shied away from them.
I might add, if I may, from the Portland's perspective, if I can put that hat on for a moment. 3 comments on rail. One, we have looked at sort of local rail as a business that the port would like to be in. And by that I mean the ability to gather goods and then put them on either on local or shorter freight lines. And there's an opportunity for the port to do that. Secondly, we supported Connect Oregon, which I mentioned in my talk, which is a $100 million bill that went through the legislature, which among other purposes is to address improving rail projects. And third, and actually very importantly, through Bill Wyatt's leadership and Carl Warren and others at the port, we have really focused on the Port of Portland being a multimodal center, that has contributed to the recent return of some of the container shipping companies. We may not have a big enough market to be a large import center in Oregon, and so that's a disadvantage for our export market unless we can get other reasons for the containers to come in. And the other reasons are that we argue with our system now, we're quicker to Chicago or to Omaha or to Minneapolis coming through here than the other West Coast ports. So we're very focused on rail as a key to our trading area.
We have time for one more question.
My name is Peter Fenner, and I'm a member of City Club. One of the observations I've made is that Route 84 and Route 5, which are the easiest places to see this, is that the roads are very badly rutted from studded tires. I haven't seen anything worse than that except in Denver, Colorado. I wonder if we've analyzed and understand the cost of studded tires in your study. Does anybody have any data on that?
We did not. So that's the short answer. I know the ruts you're talking about, but I don't know any of the economics. That would be an ODOT question.
Thank you.
I want to thank our speakers today, Michael Powell, Ann Gardner, and Jay Waldron. Thank you very much for joining us. And we're adjourned.